Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Jason Deitch and this is today's Chiropractic Leadership Magazine. Today, of course, I have the pleasure of being with Dr. Gerry Clum. Dr. Clum, Gerry, as I'd prefer to call you, welcome and thanks for taking some time to not only put on a jacket and put together a great set for us, but sharing your knowledge and wisdom with us here today.
Thanks, Jason. This has been quite an exercise to learn about lighting and three-point lighting, and I've become quite the video student. I'm still in the C minus to D plus category, but I'm in the course anyway.
We're recording and we're on, so we're in the game, and I think for all of us, we'll keep getting better with time. But today's conversation, really, this issue of today's chiropractic leadership is really all about engagement. And you've been around this profession for decades. I don't want to age you or anything like that, but you've been there from the beginning of Life University, Life West. You've been there at the table for many pivotal, I think, experiences throughout our profession's history. And what I really want to sort of have a conversation with, and what I hope listeners get out of this, is your perspective on the impact that engagement has, and perhaps even some specific experiences, through your history, where there may have been pivotal moments that could have gone better or could have gone worse, but somehow either engagement positively impacted our outcome, and perhaps lack of engagement may have taken us on paths that could be better should we had engagement historically. So, can you speak to what are some experiences you've had in the history of our profession that, may be interesting for those of us that may live in a world that we're in private practice? I'm paying my student loans, I'm paying my mortgage, everything's fine. I don't need to engage. I don't like to be political. I work hard enough as it is. What's the message for practicing chiropractors and the sense of how important it is to be involved?
Well, thanks, Jason. It's a great question, and it's a very timely question. You're right. I'm getting pretty close, within striking distance of 50 years in the profession, and it's been a remarkable 50-year period of time in our history. I assume everybody, when they look back on their life and their times in their career, kind of feels the same way. But there's a lot that went on in these 50 years, and I started my career prior to the time that, for example, CCE was recognized and the Department of Education defined the Doctor of Chiropractic degree as a spurious degree, to the point where we have levels of acceptance and recognition today that, at that time were inconceivable. So I've seen a good bit of that transition along the way. But I think the most fundamental transition that's happened is that when I started school in 1970, there were about 12,000 chiropractors in the United States. We were too small to be a worry to anybody in any way. We were inconsequential in relationship to the size of the population of the country. We were spread out so thin across the country that while we had a few population centers where we had relatively better concentration of chiropractors in a given geographic region, the truth of the matter is we were few and far between in American life, and we weren't seen. But over the course of the last 40-some years, we've gone from 12,000 to 70,000. And if my math is correct, I think that's like a six-fold increase, or just about, in that 40-year period of time. And a lot of dynamics have changed. In that time period where you're one of 12,000, you were an island unto yourself. You represented the profession, whether you wanted to or not. It's a kind of thing, in any minority setting, the individual represents the minority. In a majority setting, the individual is just one part of the majority, but they don't represent the majority. So as a chiropractor in those days, every chiropractor was the representation of chiropractic to the world. And it was a time where there was no need other than political survival to cooperate, to participate with, or to engage in the activities of the profession. And the truth of the matter is, most of our colleagues from that era do not see the infrastructure of the profession, whether it's national associations, whether it's educational institutions, whether it's accrediting bodies, whether it's regulatory bodies. They don't see any of those things as contributing to their success, their health, and their well-being as a practitioner. They see their success, in many cases rightfully so, as a function of their grit, their determination, their tenacity, and their creativity, and that they created their circumstance. Well, in 2016, the world doesn't work that way anymore. Obviously, personal initiative, personal involvement, personal creativity are hugely important and will remain hugely important in any endeavor, in any sector of society. Service, business, product, doesn't matter. That will always be huge. But the issue that has changed for us as a discipline that we haven't caught up with is the idea that we no longer individually represent the profession. The profession has a persona of its own in the culture. Number two, in addition to not representing the profession, the days where we could continue to function as an isolated individual in some rural community in Colorado or New York or Georgia or Oklahoma simply don't exist anymore. The systems have become so evolved and so organized, and we now have a need to pay attention to one another, to react with, for, and on behalf of one another, and it takes a completely different orientation on the part of the psyche of the chiropractor at this point in time. And clearly, the people of my time, the gray hairs in the crowd, have the farthest to travel in that consideration. You know, people talk about the millennials and the Gen Xers and so on. These are people that view collaboration as a fact of life. In my day, when you opened up a practice in a town and you went to visit the chiropractor, the first question was, well, what are you here for? Not welcome to town, not how are you, not great, glad to have you here. It was like, this is my town. What are you doing here? And today, we now understand that the society expects collaboration, the society expects cooperation, whether they articulate it or not. It's part of the way things work. You know, you buy software on a computer, and it doesn't matter what brand of computer it is, it works on the computer. Well, obviously Mac, PC stuff, all that, got to set that aside. But you buy Windows software for Windows system, regardless of whether Dell made it, whether Asus made it, or IBM made it, or Lenovo made it, whatever the case is, it works. Well, that doesn't happen by accident. That happens through an intense level of collaboration, cooperation, and communication between the parties, between and among the parties that are involved. That's something we haven't learned to do well. We have looked at the good in the profession as the product of our activity, and the not so good is the product of the other guy. Well, it doesn't quite work that way. You know, the bottom line is the good and the bad both emanate from the same spots. And we need to come to an awareness that the idea of participating in a state association, a national association, political processes, they're not luxuries. They're absolutely essential requirements of the life and times that we live in. You know, I used to teach a course at Life West that was looking at the relationship of the profession to the society. And one of the things I would always enjoy talking about is the idea that our discipline, like any other discipline, exists because of a social contract and legislation that can be changed with the stroke of one pen of one governor in one state, and chiropractic could cease to exist in that state, dentistry could cease to exist in that state, optometry could cease to exist in that state, etc. The bottom line is we need to protect that social contract. There is nothing in the Constitution that says Gerry Clum has a right to practice chiropractic in any given state or town or city or community or county across the United States. It is there, that right is there, because of a piece of legislation that was enacted and put in place for the profession, for the public, and for the society at large as a course of activity.
But not automatically, and that's, I think, the point to make there. It's because someone or a small group of someones had a vision, had an idea, felt it was important enough to take time from their family, from their practice. I'm sure invest lots of money, and we probably don't even know their names, so it wasn't for the credit, but it was because they stood up for something they believed in. Am I right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And you know, the reality is we have three things to contribute in this life. We've got time, we've got treasure, and we've got talent. And some people can give up their time, some people can write a check, and some people have a particular skill or ability that can be called upon at a given moment in time to address a specific situation. But that's all we've got. And if we don't invest those three things in our discipline, like any other organism, will start to fade, will start to fail, and will fail to thrive over time.
So let's get specific about it. Either, your choice. If there was a historic moment you're aware of that, that the profession still exists the way in its present format because of engagement or involvement. Or my other question, whichever one you want to take, is what are the threats today? What do we see as future consequences if we don't shift this culture of, either I'm not successful enough that what I can do matters because I've got to put food on my table, or I'm so successful right now that I don't really need to participate because I got mine. I mean, there tends to be this sort of one or the other extreme.
Right.
Where are we going, and what are going to be the consequences, in your opinion, if we sort of continue with this culture that I'm not even sure how to describe it? I don't know if it's apathy. I don't know if it's a sense of, my voice doesn't matter. I don't know if it's a sense of I don't know what to do, how to contribute, and how to get involved. But it seems to me from, the leaders I know, like yourself, Dr. Riekman, many of the others, that there just tends to be almost a culture of, I don't know if you call it entitlement or the expectation that leaders are going to handle it, and if they do exactly what I want, the way I want it, I'll be happy to give a little bit of money or time. But there also tends to be this strong internal criticism that if something's not said exactly the way I want it, or there's a lot of criticism, as I speak to a lot of chiropractors regularly, of opinions and conclusions that seem to be drawn based on partial information, oftentimes misinformation, and not really having access to the knowledge of the full breadth or depth of the circumstance to know why certain decisions have been made. And we often become our own worst enemies within the profession to hold each other back. What are some of the consequences, or maybe what are some of the experiences? What can you say to those watching to inspire them to realize this is important? Our profession's future depends on it. Your practice future potentially depends on it. Your income potentially depends on it, and all the implications that go along with that.
Yeah. Well, let me go back to the analogy of the early 70s, or the picture of the early 70s and where we are today. In the early 70s, there were three healthcare disciplines that somebody would look at going into. They were medicine, they were dentistry, and they were chiropractic. Now, if we look around today, in that sector that we existed as chiropractors, in that alternative healthcare sector, there are a dozen competitors for that space that was once ours and ours alone. Naturopaths weren't on the horizon 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Homeopaths were not on the horizon. Massage practitioners were not on the horizon. Body workers were not on the horizon. Physiotherapists were not on the horizon. All of these disciplines are beginning to carve away from what was ours at one time. Now, it wasn't ours exclusively. I understand that. Osteopathy existed, physical medicine existed, and so on. But the bottom line was, in the non-drug, non-surgical alternative to medicine approach, where there was one party making the challenge, there are now a dozen parties benefiting from the challenge we made. Now, that means we either protect our market share by being clearer about what it is we do than we have ever been before and doing it better than we have ever done before, or the market will take that function, that contribution, and give it to the people that do it better, do it more efficiently than we do. So one of the considerations in terms of the leadership challenge we've got here is an understanding that not only has the game changed in terms of the prevalence and distribution of chiropractors, the game has changed in terms of the prevalence and distribution of other practitioners who argue for a portion of the space that was once almost exclusively ours. And we have been very slow to react to that. And we've been very slow to assert our uniqueness in that environment. I'm going to give a presentation at the World Federation Association of Chiropractic Colleges meeting coming up here next month. And the title of the presentation is Why Chiropractic Should Be Separate and Distinct. Now, I'll give you my first slide. Separate and distinct does not mean isolated and alone. If we were looking at any industry, any service, any product, every single entity in that wants to position itself relative to that marketplace. They want to have people understand what it is they do, what value it has to them, and why they should choose that service, product, or activity over another. And we've been in this process of look alike, sound alike, get along, and be part of the team, and we're losing our identity in that process. Now, I'm not suggesting we need to be running down the street with our hair on fire and screaming and sounding like crazy people to get attention on the part of the population. Quite the contrary. But I am suggesting that it is infinitely more critical than it has ever been in our history for us to understand who we are, what we do, and why we do it. And the challenges that are before the discipline right now is to realize that there's a certain level of acceptance that we've gained, but you got to understand that when it's all said and done, organized medicine doesn't have a problem with chiropractic today. It's got a problem with the chiropractor. They'd like to take what we do. We've bent the wheat. We've established the value. We've established the contribution in the marketplace, and now we're letting everybody else run away with it. That's the challenge that we've got right now, one of the challenges that we've got right now, and where each individual chiropractor and how he or she behaves in their office and on collectively throughout the mass of the profession to a global entity and activity contributes to and either adds constructive value to it or detracts from it along the way. And it's that perspective that we need to know that there is a problem, and that the problem is in part our lack of appreciation for the lay of the land in 2016 and the expectation of the society and the expectation of healthcare consumers and the system at large. We just simply can't continue to function as an isolated lone wolf, answerable to no one, responsible to no one. I do it because I've got a license and I can do it, and to hell with you.
What do you believe is the reason that there hasn't been more engagement? And I'll also ask, and handle this how you'd like, why are we not as engaged as we should be? Number one, and number two, what does engagement look like? What in a perfect world, what would practicing chiropractors be doing to be engaged?
Yeah, I'll go back again to my 1970s discussion. In 1970s, there were a group of people that you didn't need anything but other than initials or first name to know, and they were the leadership of the profession. It was J.J. Jancy. It was Ernest Napolitano. It was Sid Williams. It was Jim Parker. It was Vint Logan. And it was Carl Cleveland. And when you said JJ or Ernest or Carl or Jim or Sid, everybody knew what was going on. And we've had this patriarchal kind of position where we as a discipline and we as individuals within the discipline have defaulted to a paternal figure and invariably male to be the leadership and to be the voice of the profession. And we were very comfortable with the fact that we didn't have to do it. Sid will do it. Jancy will do it. Ernest will do it. You know, you name it. We had this is part of our DNA, and that transition again over the last 40 to 50 years, there aren't those people anymore. There's a few of them left, but and I don't say that a few of them left that's bad. A few of them left that's a transition that isn't complete. But the bottom line is that opportunity to defer to somebody else to carry the water, to do the heavy lifting, etc., just isn't going to be there in the future. If you think about how the availability of social media and the power that puts in the hand of the individual, you know, you don't have to be a national association with a couple $1 million mailing budget and a list that's a pristine mailing list that you can get to every chiropractor in the country. You know, you need to do just exactly what we're doing. Sit down, have a conversation in front of a camera, and start to get people to listen to it. And that's part of that's emblematic of the change that's gone on in the profession as well. So in terms of when you say what does leadership look like, it looks like taking responsibility for the profession, and not just taking responsibility for your practice, which people have done very well over the years, and I'm not critical of that at all. I'm just saying that at this point in time, that luxury can no longer be allowed to persist if we are concerned about the future of the profession beyond your practice, beyond your moment, beyond your income, and beyond your family's well-being. If we're concerned about the contribution the profession can make to humankind, to the planet, then we need to have a completely different response. And I think we're awakening to that. We're not fully alert to it, but we're beginning to get there. And hopefully, we can help spur that on. That engagement process involved in dealing with the structures of the profession and the structures of the society that we have to interface with are ones that we've not taken good advantage of in a long time. So that's part of the answer from where I sit, Jason.
And so, you know, knowing what I think, you know, you and I both know, and probably everybody listening, at least who was involved in the chiropractic profession, what do you say to those, I don't know if you call them critics or cynics, or those that sort of have this, I don't know if it's an attitude or a sense that, you know, they have a belief, perhaps it was about, you know, CCE, whether we should work with them or take them down, or they have a particular opinion, and if the leadership doesn't necessarily follow their opinion, they almost go against our own leaders. What do you say to those that just kind of have this sense that if it's not exactly the way I'd say it, it's not exactly the way I would do it? You know, sometimes studies, we were talking a little bit earlier, a study says something about spinal manipulation, and it's really positive, but because we prefer the term adjustment, we tend to not want to, you know, work with it, understand it, appreciate it for the value it does have. How should we be thinking about things in a maybe more inclusive, more tolerant, more open-minded, more curious way than I think my observation is that most of the profession has now? We've got a lot of small kind of factions or groups or tribes. They have their own language, their own culture, their own kind of whatever you want to call it, political systems internally, but we're a lot of small things that almost just keep on not supporting each other, therefore not elevating. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, the behavior is a red herring. And I don't care whether you're talking about in the chiropractic profession or you're talking about it in relationship with your wife or your spouse or your significant other. The bottom line is it's a tactic and it's a strategy to allow you to feel that you don't have to address something and you can abdicate your responsibility relative to it because of the way it was expressed or whatever. And it's very short-sighted. You are both adults, and the bottom line is you try that in a relationship, and it's suicidal. You try it in a professional sense, and it's the same way. When we look at that small ball perspective, that well, I'll work with my technique group, and I'll argue on behalf of my technique group, and I'll work with my philosophic group, and I'll argue on behalf of that. I would ask people the question, and I say this sincerely, and I say it without judgment, and I say it for myself as much as I say it for you, is that your adherence to those small ball perspectives, how have they helped the profession? They might have helped you at a given spot. You might have found inspiration in them. You might have found some kind of motivation in them. You might have found some clinical insight in them. But I'm asking you, how did it change the profession as a whole? And I think we haven't been taught that that's the question we need to ask. You know, I'll be honest with you. I'm not trying to sound like an old man here. I don't think I'm an old man. But I think it's safe to say that the majority of my time in the ranks of the profession is behind me. I'd like to think that the majority of my contribution is yet to be made, but the time is behind me. And when I look back on the last 50 years, there's things that I'm very excited about that were positive change. But at the same time, I look back and I see, you know, that given percentage of the population, you know, I think we're talking now the numbers around 10% penetration seeking chiropractic care on a regular basis. And I know there's been some recent Gallup studies that have come out that have had some positive perspectives on the profession and so on, and attitudes about it, and those are wonderful. What I'm suggesting is that if this thing is so good and we have been so good at it, why are we having such a terrible time cracking this nut and getting penetration in the marketplace far deeper than we are? And for me, it's I've got to look back and say, you know, how did my behavior contribute to this restriction and this impediment? And where did my behavior accomplish something in this environment? And then begin to shift my activities, my personal activities, Gerry Clum's activities, towards those things that build greater good. And you get to a point where you know, this is a gray hair comment for sure, you realize you just don't have enough time to mess with that crap. And you leave it aside and you get on to other things that you think are more important in the long haul. That's the sense that I think the profession needs to come to and to engage more readily. You know, I have made arguments for all of my career about language, about terminology, about perspectives, and so on. And I'll continue to make them when I think that they are important to moving the profession in a given direction. And I'll also continue to look at the value of the long haul. You know, the CCE is in the process of revising its standards. And they closed on September 30th, I think it was, they closed a comment period on this latest round of standards revision. And the CCE very boldly and very bravely, I might add, got to a point where they honestly looked at the standards and said, these are educational standards, they're not political levers. Now, whether you view chiropractic as a primary care discipline or not, is that an educational issue or is that a political issue? CCE said that's an educational issue. Excuse me, that's a political issue. And it doesn't belong in the standards. And the concept of primary care physician, is that a political issue or an educational issue? Well, that's a right granted by legislation. So therefore, it's clearly a political issue. Should it belong in the standards? And, I look back and I think of the countless hours that Sid and myself and others, Dr. Cleveland, Doctors Cleveland, invested over the years discussing these aspects of the CCE and so on. And now, 30, 40 years later, we're starting to see the change come around to the things that we talked about at that time. So, not only do we have to understand that the demands of us are different, but we have to understand that the fullness of time is the measure and not the moment. Very little changes in the moment. Very little. A great deal changes over time. And a great deal changes over time. It's like erosion. The Grand Canyon got there because of water over time. And it was time and time and time and time that allowed that to happen. And, we can make those changes, we can make those inroads, but we've got to understand it's a long haul game, and it's not a small ball process. So,
Yeah. Patience. You mean we have to be patient with the process? This is very much what we teach people about healing and so on, right? It's
right.
fascinating that there are physiological principles that we love to espouse to others, but are sometimes difficult for us to see as principles that apply, in all kinds of organic processes of sorts.
Yeah.
In closing, what would you like to see listeners, viewers do? What is being, perhaps maybe we call it a chiropractic activist? What should they be doing? How should they be shifting? You mentioned the questions they should be asking. How should they be shifting their attitudes? And what can they do to become more involved and perhaps start a positive movement towards inclusiveness and impact as opposed to separateness? And I've learned it as you can be right or you can be effective, and we're addicted to being right at the cost in many cases of being effective. What should they do? You're the historian. You've paved this path for many decades. You have a very high perch from which you see things from in terms of the future. What do graduating students, what do new practicing doctors, even those that have been around for a while, what's the new message? What's our growth spurt opportunity here?
Fred Barge was famous for talking about the idea that illness and disease was one of two things. It was the body's inability to assess and respond to its internal environment, or its inability to assess and respond to the external environment. And I think for us at this point, we're in that same spot. There's two levels, at least two levels, that I think that I, as a chiropractor, have to begin to look at things differently from. The first is the internal perspective. And you said it a moment ago, we would much rather be right than be effective. And that's a product of getting our collective keisters kicked across, media for generations. And, people now very quietly adopting our perspectives, adopting our understanding, but having nothing to do with the chiropractor. I don't know about you, but that pisses me off.
Furious.
And the reality is that I need to understand for myself, do I want to be right or do I want to be effective? And if I want to be right, I can be as righteous as the day is long. But that isn't going to get the job done. What's going to get the job done is me trying to understand the moment and the dynamics that go into things. We're in the middle of a horrific political process here in the United States right now. And everybody wants to focus it on two people. Well, the two people are the symptoms of the problem. They're not the problem. They're particular manifestations of it, but they're not the problem in and of themselves. They're the product of a mindset that created this environment that we're in right now as a nation politically. Same thing for us as chiropractors. Where we are is the product of our collective mentality. And until we change our collective mentality, understand that our responsibilities are different internally, we need to see things differently. We need to see things from a different vantage point. And if we do so, we can make some gains. The second consideration is the external environment. It's real simple. 5 to 10% of the profession has paid dues, has represented the profession nationally, and they have carried the weight of the other 90 to 95% of the profession. There's nothing that works that way. Nothing. It can't be, it's not a sustainable model. The profession needs to engage, and frankly, I don't care who you engage with. This isn't an ACA comment, this isn't an ICA comment, this isn't a One Chiropractic comment, this is an engagement comment. Get in the game. Be part of the process that's involved. And you can throw your hands up and say, well, they don't say it like I want to say it, they don't do it like I want to say it. Then get in there and change it. Get in there and change it. Complaining on it from the sidelines is personally gratifying and systemically unproductive.
Yeah. And a chronic addiction of our profession, if I may be so bold to say.
It is, because we've been able to have it. And I look at medicine and I think of medicine's structure puts people in cooperation with one another, whether they want to be or not. And the opportunity to exist as a lone wolf apart from the system just doesn't exist like it does in our world. And we've got to understand that world and that world view, not medicine, but that involvement of people and people participating in a collaborative environment, that is the world view of the moment that we've got to respond to. And the sooner we do, the stronger we do, the better off we're going to be. So my advice is, I'm going to sit down tonight after this conversation with you and thinking about all this yammering this afternoon and ask myself these questions. What am I doing that's just continue to gunk up the works? Well, stop doing that which isn't working and keep doing that which does. So that's for me, that's my direction out of this thing. The second part of it is, where can I be engaged? I've got a finite amount of time, I've got a finite amount of treasure, and I've got a finite amount of talent. Where can I put those to work for the best interest in the long haul for the profession? And then go to work. As a young kid, chiropractic changed my life. As a dad, chiropractic saved my daughter. I could work from now until the end of time and not pay back what I have been given by this profession. I don't think that's any different for most chiropractors today. Whether it's the livelihood you have, the circumstance of your family, your health, your well-being, or the joy to have had that relationship with somebody under your hands whose life has changed in ways that they nor you could have ever possibly imagined.
Yeah. It's pay
for the right.
Yeah. It's one of the things that makes our profession, I think, so unique, so different. And those practicing chiropractors like myself, for over a century now, have seen this isn't just a massage. It's not just take a vitamin. This is some really significant life-saving and transformational work that all of us have seen. I'm beyond grateful for your wisdom. We could go on for hours, but for the sense of time, we'll close up this. I will do some more videos with some other specific questions. I just simply want to close, number one, by saying thank you for your dedication. Thank you for what you've done over the decades. Some may not really be familiar with the decades of work and dedication, and I dare say sacrifices you've made over the years. If you are new to this profession or still somewhat young, in the profession. Dr. Clum is a legend and an icon, and I encourage you to look up what he's done in the past. But for the sake of time, I'll take the liberty of closing, and I'll give you the last minute to close and say goodbye. But in closing, I want to encourage people, if you're watching this video and you're watching it still, it is proof that this really is the medium of the day. Today's chiropractic leadership, under the guidance of Dr. Guy Reekman and Life University and the board, is really all about trying to create an inclusive environment where we can have these kinds of conversations, where we can elevate the conversation above and beyond us and them, but really, bring us together as a coalition to, I think, as I've said, raise the tide so all boats go with it, so to speak. And I encourage all of you to, keep engaging online in a positive, constructive way. Get involved, as Dr. Clum said a moment ago. What can you do to make a difference? Where can you be involved? And not just throw darts behind your keyboard on social media, but in fact contribute and help others become more open-minded and more inclusive in the conversation. Dr. Clum, I'll let you have closing words and say thank you very much.
Well, a smart man would say thank you and keep quiet, so I have to do that. So thank you. Been great.
Right
I
on.
appreciate it.
Right on. Thank you for watching this edition of today's Chiropractic Leadership.